Long ago, in the depths of a quiet forest, there lived a monk who had renounced the world. He had built for himself a small hut of wood and clay, nothing more than what was necessary for shelter, and spent his days in silence, discipline, and meditation. He had vowed celibacy and poured his entire being into the pursuit of spiritual clarity. Over the years, the distractions of the world seemed to fade away. His heart was steady, his mind serene, and his desires silent. One day, a king ventured into that same forest on a hunting expedition. From sunrise until late in the afternoon, he scoured the wilderness for prey, but his efforts yielded nothing. The sun was hot, his throat parched, his body heavy with exhaustion. In his desperate search for water, he stumbled through the thicket until, at last, he caught sight of a humble dwelling nestled among the trees. With faltering steps, he approached, but before he could reach the doorway, he collapsed to the ground from hunger and thirst. The monk, hearing the sound, hurried outside. He saw the man lying unconscious, his face pale and body trembling. Kneeling beside him, the monk sprinkled cold water across his brow and lips until the king stirred. Slowly, the man's eyes opened, and the monk helped him sit upright. Offering him fresh water and fruits he had gathered, the monk restored the stranger's strength. When the king realized his life had been saved, he folded his hands in gratitude. "Wise one," he said earnestly, "you have given me back my breath. Please, ask for anything, and I will grant it." The monk smiled gently and shook his head. "Great king, I have no need of riches or favors. My life is devoted to celibacy and discipline. All I require is this forest, this hut, and the stillness of my practice." The king was deeply moved by this answer. Rarely had he met someone untouched by power and wealth. Bowing his head, he declared, "If ever you wish to visit my palace, you will find my doors open. Come, and you shall be honored as my teacher and guest." Months passed before the monk considered this invitation. At last, one morning, he set aside his usual routine and journeyed to the palace. When the king saw him arrive, he received him with great respect and joy, ordering that the best care be given to his guest. To attend him, the king assigned one of his most trusted maids, a young woman known not only for her diligence, but also for her striking beauty and grace. From the moment she began serving him, the monk found himself in unfamiliar territory. She offered him meals with a quiet smile, stood beside him as he rested, and even fanned him as he slept. Her movements were gentle, her voice soft, and her presence filled the room with a warmth he had never known. For years he had lived far from women, untouched by such closeness. Now, with each passing day, he began to notice her more. His eyes lingered longer than they should. His thoughts strayed toward her when they should have remained on meditation. At first, he told himself it was harmless, a fleeting curiosity, nothing more. But slowly, desire stirred within him, like a spark catching in dry grass. The peace he had cultivated for years began to tremble. His mind, once steady as a calm lake, rippled with restless longing. Whenever the maid attended to him, her nearness awakened something buried deep inside. The brush of her hand when passing him a bowl of food, the glimpse of her eyes lowered modestly, the sound of her laughter, all these began to haunt his silence. And so the monk found himself at war within, his vows on one side and his heart's secret yearning on the other. One evening, unable to quiet the turmoil, he asked her softly, "Tell me, fair one, are you married?" She blushed but answered politely, "No, sir, I remain unmarried." The monk's heart surged. In a moment of weakness, he whispered, "Would you meet me outside the palace someday?" The maid hesitated, then smiled with gentle acceptance. "Of course, master. I am here to serve you. My home is in a nearby village. If you come, I shall welcome it as a blessing." From that instant, the monk could no longer steady his thoughts. That night, he lay awake, consumed by visions of her face. At dawn, when the first light touched the palace walls, he rushed to her village. She greeted him warmly, set before him food prepared with care, and spoke to him with a tenderness that filled his chest with both joy and confusion. Yet even as he tasted this newfound closeness, a storm brewed in his soul. One part of him remembered the vows he had held sacred for so long, the years of discipline, the silence of the forest. Another part was overwhelmed by her beauty, her kindness, her nearness. Should he propose marriage? Could he abandon the spiritual path he had walked for so many years? Fear gnawed at him, fear that she might reject him, fear that he might lose her, fear that he was already too far gone. And so the monk began visiting her daily, unable to resist. The villagers soon noticed his frequent presence at her house. Whispers spread. What was a monk, bound by vows, doing in the home of a maiden every day? The matter, they feared, would dishonor not only the man but their community as well. Troubled, they carried their concerns to the king. The king, upon hearing the complaints, was unsettled. He had once admired this monk as a man of discipline and virtue. Could it be true that he had allowed desire to undo him? The king resolved to watch closely. Meanwhile, the monk, blind to all else, was preparing to take the final step. In his mind, he resolved tomorrow he would ask for her hand. Tomorrow he would bind himself not to solitude, but to love. His years of penance had already begun to crumble, and he stood on the edge of surrender, unaware of the ruin it would bring. The monk could no longer contain the tide that pulled him toward the young woman. Each day he found himself at her doorstep, staying longer than before, speaking with her, sharing meals, and basking in her presence. What had begun as a single visit became a habit, then an obsession. His thoughts, once trained to dwell on higher truths, now revolved only around her smile, her laughter, the soft grace of her movements. The villagers, who had always looked upon the monk with respect, began to murmur among themselves. A man devoted to celibacy, they said, should not be seen so often in a maiden's home. Their whispers grew into concern until finally they went before the king. "Your Majesty," they said, "the monk you honor is no longer living as he should. Each day he visits the maiden's house, spending long hours there. If a monk behaves so, what lesson does that teach the youth of our village?" The king listened carefully. Though troubled by their words, he withheld judgment. Yet deep inside, he remembered the trust he had once placed in this man and wondered if it had been misplaced. The monk, however, was oblivious to all this. His heart was consumed by longing. The bond between him and the maiden grew, and with it his inner turmoil. At last, he resolved that he would ask her to marry him. Yet fear gnawed at him. What if she rejected him? After all, he was a monk, a man who had sworn to renounce worldly life. Would she accept such a proposal? Still, desire pushed him forward. He told himself he would wait a little longer before speaking, but in his heart the decision was already made. Every day he visited her, and every day he delayed, torn between his vows and his passion. It happened that on the morning he had resolved to finally speak, the village was celebrating a festival. Tradition held that giving alms on this day would bring double blessings. When the monk arrived at her home, the maiden greeted him with warmth, then said, "Sir, do you have a few coins? I wish to give them to the poor today, to honor the festival." The monk hesitated, then admitted, "I have no coins, but do not worry, I will ask the king." "How many do you need?" he asked. "Just 4, she replied gently. With this in mind, the monk hurried to the palace. He reminded the king of the day long ago when he had saved his life in the forest. "Your Majesty," he said, "you once promised to grant me any wish I might ask. Today I have come to claim it." The king, though his respect had begun to wane, still answered, "Very well. Tell me." At that moment, the monk intended to ask only for 4 coins. But then a thought entered his mind. Why only 4? Why not 8? Why not 16? Why not 1,000? The king owed him his very life. Surely he would grant anything. And then, like a shadow, an even greater ambition rose. Why not the entire kingdom? If he possessed the throne, he reasoned, he could make the maiden his queen. All his doubts would vanish. All his desires would be fulfilled. Blinded by lust and greed, the monk looked at the king and declared, "Your Majesty, I wish for your entire kingdom." The word struck the king like a blow. For a moment, silence filled the chamber. Then anger flared in his eyes. Already he had received complaints about this monk's conduct. Now to see such hypocrisy laid bare, demanding not just wealth, not just comfort, but the crown itself, was too much to bear. "You hypocrite," the king thundered. "You speak of purity and renunciation, yet your heart is filled with desire. You have lost your dignity, your honor, and now you dare to ask for my throne?" He called his guards and ordered, "Take this man away. He is no monk, he is a prisoner. Lock him away for life." And so it was done. The monk who had once been revered for his discipline and wisdom was stripped of freedom, chained in darkness. The vows he had upheld for years had been destroyed in a matter of days. His peace was gone, his reputation ruined, his honor crushed beneath the weight of his own weakness. What began as a single spark of desire had grown into a fire that consumed everything he had built. In the end, the monk had not only lost the woman he longed for, but also his respect, his freedom, and his very identity. His downfall was complete. The monk's fate was sealed. From the stillness of his forest hut to the golden halls of the palace, he had traveled far, but not upward, only downward, undone by the very desires he once renounced. In the end, he sat behind bars, stripped of honor, dignity, and freedom. Years of discipline and meditation, years of solitude and sacrifice were all lost because he could not master the fire of lust. Word of his downfall spread throughout the villages and towns. For many, his story became a cautionary tale whispered to the young. Even those who appear strongest in virtue can fall if they underestimate temptation. Desire does not announce itself loudly at first. It arrives softly, a whisper, a glance, a passing thought. But if left unchecked, it grows until it consumes everything in its path. This ancient tale carries a lesson that speaks just as clearly today as it did centuries ago. In our world, temptation no longer lurks only in palaces or secret encounters. It fills the airwaves, the internet, the glowing screens in our hands. With a single tap, one can plunge into an endless flood of images and videos designed to inflame desire. Studies show that a vast portion of online content is explicitly sexual, waiting to ensnare the lonely and the bored. Most people indulge when they are alone, thinking it harmless. Yet those private moments often erode self-control, leaving behind restlessness, guilt, and addiction. The truth is, lust thrives in isolation, but fades in good company. When we sit among family, share conversation with friends, or engage in meaningful work, the shadows lose their grip. But when we retreat into solitude with nothing but screens and silence, temptation finds fertile ground. It is important to understand that sexual energy itself is not evil. On the contrary, it is one of life's most powerful forces, meant for creation and continuation of humanity. Yet when wasted on fleeting pleasures, it drains the body, scatters the mind, and weakens the spirit. Great leaders, scientists, artists, and saints throughout history often rose above ordinary limits because they knew how to discipline this energy, to channel it toward higher purpose rather than squander it on empty indulgence. The monk's downfall reminds us that unchecked desire can unravel even the strongest resolve. Self-control does not mean suppressing what is natural, but mastering it, knowing how to redirect it into strength, clarity, and focus. The choice lies with each of us. Every day we face the same decision the monk faced, to surrender to desire or to rise above it. Surrender may feel sweet in the moment, but it leads to decay, distraction, and eventual ruin. Discipline, though difficult, builds dignity, strength, and freedom. By mastering our impulses, we reclaim our power and move closer to our true potential. The story ends with a warning, but also with hope. It shows us what happens when lust goes unchecked, but it also points to the possibility of greatness when we rise above it. The same energy that destroys can, if guided wisely, build extraordinary lives. And so the choice remains before us all. Will we fall as the monk did, or will we use our strength to walk a higher path?